on the chair.
Oh, really? We're gonna do this stuff? I heard. Are you ready? Oh my God.
I know, it's so corny.
They basically turned a tragic accident into a murder.
My name is Peter Wlasiuk. I've been incarcerated for 24 years, going on 25.
In the early morning hours of April 3rd, 2002, around 12:30 a.m., a 1998 GMC pickup truck belonging to Peter Wlasiuk was driven into Guilford Lake from County Road 35. Peter's wife, Patty, was driving when the car went off the road. Peter escaped through the car window, but was unfortunately unable to save Patty, who was later found on the lake bottom. She was pronounced dead at Sydney Hospital. Peter was arrested 5 days later on April 8, 2002, at the age of 33, based on a completely bogus police theory.
The police theory was that, Peter had picked his wife up at work at the hospital and in his truck and drove her home, forced beer down her throat, and then he took her out behind the house and strangled her, dragged her to the truck, and then drove down to the lake and let the truck drive into the lake. But that whole theory just didn't make a lot of sense.
There's simply a series of inconsistent facts or inconsistent theories from the prosecution that failed to prove that he committed the crime.
When the medical examiner did the first autopsy, he ruled it as a probable drowning, which it was.
The medical examiner later changed that to some kind of strangulation or suffocation.
They came up with this issue with the burdocks. They saw the burdocks in her hair from the autopsy pictures.
The police used this to identify what they thought was the scene of the crime, a burdock bush in the backyard. The medical examiner changed the cause of death merely on a plant.
That was the only evidence he used to change his mind. So it wasn't based on any medical evidence.
They also claimed that there was no burdock in Guilford Lake, but this was plainly false.
It is hard for me to understand how anyone would assert that burdocks were not found around the lake. I traveled there with Detective Beers. I found burdock rampant throughout the area.
Part of the drowning process involves potentially regurgitation. I noticed in the notes from the pathologist that food particles were found in the lungs of the victim. In order to go through that regurgitation and inhalation of food particles, she has to be alive. But then she probably surely drowned.
We even consulted with our own pathologist who said that there's no reason to believe that it wasn't a drowning.
But none of these experts were allowed or able to testify on Peter's behalf. Therefore, the jurors could only hear the prosecution's prejudicial and biased testimonies.
They didn't call witnesses that would have been appropriate to the defense. It defies imagination how badly this case was conducted.
I see a lot of junk science. This was really, really bad. I mean, you have medical examiners flip-flopping, and you have botanical experts who are just flat out wrong about some of the facts that they asserted.
Every time I brought evidence to prove my innocence, they just moved to pieces again.
The prosecution maintains that Patty was smothered, despite their own admissions that there was no evidence of it, and we don't see that on the property or on Patty's own clothing. Everyone had tunnel vision in this case. They immediately focused on Peter and refused to investigate any credible alternatives of what could have caused this tragedy. The abundance of errors in Peter's case forced him to be tried 3 times.
Chenango County is a very small county. They only have about 46,000 people. So the jury pool was very limited.
Before my first trial was even done, I had generated over 118 articles. So I was convicted in the media before I even stepped foot in court.
By the time he came back for a second and third trial, it's likely that there weren't any people left in the county that didn't know about it, that he'd been convicted before.
What would you do if somebody accused you of killing somebody that was the one thing that you protected? Even right now, I'm hopeful, but I'm scared. Because you guys got lives, you're gonna go to them. The world's gonna keep turning, and I'm still sitting here as a statistic.
He'd do anything for anybody, help anybody. He was there in time of need. You know, you couldn't want a better friend or son than Peter.
They call him Uncle Pete. He's like a caretaker of everybody.
He always sought to help. He never sought to criticize or belittle. He always had something positive to say. He was different from a lot of people I've met. He stands out.
He enjoys making art. Like this clock here he made for me, that's actually paper. The clock actually works and everything.
It's better to build and create than it is to destroy.
And he's a really genuine person. He's a really gentle soul. Once you take time to get to know him, that he's not the monster that Chenango County painted him to be.
The kids come in, I started this thing, I give them colorings, I give them crayons, because our children should never have to suffer. And when they're coming here, that can be traumatizing in a negative way. So you kind of try to make a setting for them that is, you know, not as harsh on them, because they never did anything wrong, and you want them to be happy.
I'm still waiting. I've been waiting all these years, gone through all these trials. And the fact is that keeping my fingers crossed and hope that he will finally come home.
It's a hard situation because I can't give them a definitive answer. I can't give any of them promises, and I'll be damned if I give anybody a promise that I can't keep.
I just hope that I live long enough to see it, that my son comes home. If he could get out right now and come home, at least I could lay my head down for the final time and not worry, knowing that he's by my side.